Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Pride in STEM 2024 event. My name is Pacharaporn Sisaikel, or you can call me Nok in short. I am a member of the UHN IDEA Outreach and Communication Committee, and also a postdoctoral researcher at Cranberry Brain Institute here at UHN. Today marks as a momentous occasion as we gather together to celebrate the UHN Second Pride in STEM events in honor of the International Day of 2S LGBTQIA+ people in STEM. We recognize the diversity within our research community and UHN and beyond. This diversity ignites innovation, fuels discoveries, and push us toward excellent and greater scientific achievements. It is also important to acknowledge that this event occurred during the Transgender Awareness Week, a week that further emphasized the importance of fostering inclusivity, respect, and also support our transgender peers. Thank you for being a part of this event. May we continue to stand together in the celebration of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community in STEM and work toward the future where diversity remains our foundations as we build a stronger and more inclusive UHN. We would like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous people of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on the virtual platform, we invite you to take a moment with us to reflect on and acknowledge the importance of the land that we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving the relationship among our nations and to improving our own understanding of indigenous lands, people, knowledge, and cultures. For those of us in Toronto at UHN, this land is the traditional territory of several indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, the Wendat, and the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. It is now also the home to many indigenous, Inuit, Métis, and people from the across the Turtle Islands. For today's agenda, we will begin with the panelist introductions, followed by panel discussion, and finally, we will wrapping up for the Q&A session at the end. Before we begin, I would like to walk you through some YouTube accessibility features. At the bottom of your screen, you will see the several options, including closed caption or CC, that you can use. And also please note that this meeting will be recorded. During the Q&A session, we would encourage you to use the Slido. You can either scan the QR code or go to the link here, which my colleague will be share in a second. And then you can simply go to the slido.com, enter the following code to access our Slido for this event. Once you access our Slido, you will see the Q&A tab above. Simply click on it and leave your question there. My colleague will monitor and choose the question for the panelists. Just a small housekeeping note before we begin. We aim to create a safe and positive environment for all learners. Everyone's lived experience is unique, and our speaker can only highlight their own. We aim to respect of the learning journey that each of us are undertaking. And lastly, we invite feedback at any time. I would like to introduce Pam Hubley, our moderator for today. Pam is the Vice President of Health Profession and the Chief Nurse Executive at UHN. Today, we are pleased to have two amazing speakers, Denise McCormick and Dr. Tessa Ringer. Denise is a strategic advisor from the Forward Science Thinker in Genomic and Life Science. And Dr. Tessa is an emergency physician at Sinai Health System and a medical director of the Mina Daniel Senior Emergency Medicine Center at UHN, who will speak on what they love about their work, their 2S LGBTQIA+ identity, and what make the great workplace. Welcome, and I would like to pass over to Pam. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nok, for setting the stage for us and inviting everyone to really join us with an open heart and lean into the conversation that we're about to have. We'll just do a few more introductions before we get to our first question, so you can know a little bit more about each of the panelists. I would like to just introduce myself a little bit more. Let folks know that I am a registered nurse by profession. I've been nursing in Ontario for over 35 years. I've had a long run of opportunities in different positions at the point of care as a nurse practitioner, collaborator in research, worker, consultant and partner in policy development at the Ministry of Health, as well as, significant opportunities to advance my leadership role and presence. So I'm really delighted to be here at UHN. I've been here for about 2 years now, and really getting to know this wonderful community of experts across so many disciplines, so many fields of expertise, and everyone here at UHN who contributes to creating a really wonderful space that focuses in on inclusion and wellness and support for each other. By way of best practices for accessibility, I also want to highlight that I'm sitting here at my desk today. I have sort of light brown blondish hair. I'm wearing gray glasses. I've got a blue jacket on. And for those of you who may need that visual, I hope that helps you, sort of see where I'm positioned today and where I'm situated as we have this conversation. So I will pass it over to maybe Tess. Could I ask you to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Dennis.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to the community today. I really appreciate it, especially on the occasion of the Transgender Awareness Week. I think visibility is hugely important, particularly at this inflection point in trans rights, both in North America and globally. So it's really an honor and also very affirming for me to be a part of this conversation. Just a point of clarification, I'm actually not affiliated with Sinai Health System anymore. I'm an assistant professor at University Health Network and an emergency physician. So in addition to practicing full-time emergency medicine, pardon me, with a focus on nocturnal medicine, I also direct the Seniors Emergency Medicine Center. This is the world's first dedicated both physical space and comprehensive clinical research and education program for seniors attending emergency departments, and it's endowed by an incredibly generous $52 million gift from the John and Myrna Daniels Foundation, which is the largest gift that any emergency department in Canada has ever received. So it's a huge honor to be part of that. Perhaps most pertinently to this group is that when I joined UHN and took on that role, I was a cis-het male, and about halfway through my tenure in that role, I transitioned and came out as my true self as a queer trans woman. So I have had a very unique vantage point on both the trajectory of queer people as leaders in medicine and science, and also on the queer experience. And I'm really happy to share that with you, but I think for me, my career is a testament to the fact that you can actually do that at UHN and feel safe and accepted. And I truly am grateful to be part of this community. And it's just such a pleasure to speak to you. And I'm looking forward to answering your question.
Thank you so much. Did you want to take a moment to just describe some visual cues for our audience?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So my makeup is by Sephora. I'm wearing a lovely shade by House Labs on my cheeks, and some Westman Atelier. Let's see, I have these earrings are from a queer boutique in the Beaches. I'm wearing a gray tunic, and I'm wearing a pyramid-shaped piece of jewelry, and I have 2 quite large tattoos on each shoulder of 2 different Greek goddesses. I hope that is enough of a visual description. I also have brown hair, and it is up in a very messy bun right now. And behind me is my kitchen and lots of diplomas. That's me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Dennis, let's go over to you.
Yeah, again, I want to just sort of say the same thing. Thanks for inviting me. I think visibility is really important, and never be ashamed of the way you are. Okay, so first of all, I'm 5'7". I'm losing my hair. I got gray hair, but none on the top. And I was really glad that Tessa was talking about seniors, because in 2 weeks I'll be 65, so I will be a senior. So I'm nearing sort of the end of my career. I'm very proud to be gay and a scientist. I started my career in a high school and they told in a small rural community, and they told me I would never be anything technical. So I ended up going into graduate programs. Well, first of all, undergraduate in a co-op program at Waterloo early in my career in the early 80s, when it was a very different world. And I went into a co-op program. I didn't really think about science until I went into that co-op program. And then I realized, oh, there were areas of science that I really wanted to do. And so that really sort of shaped where I was going to go. I ended up doing graduate work. I have a PhD in molecular biology. And then I wanted to live all around the world. And the one thing about a degree in science is you can sort of pick those places a little bit easier, because they want talented technical people. And so I lived around there. And then I was recruited back to Canada in about 2000 because of the startup boom, and they were looking for talented people. And there was very limited, because it was in the era of a genome, the human genome being sequenced. And I worked with 2 successful startups in Canada. But the one thing about a successful startup in Canada is they get bought out by big conglomerates. And I did not want to live in the US. So I actually ended up taking a career with a funding organization that was very different than NSERC and CIHR, and that it really was subject matter focused in genomics, omics. And from there, I really sort of, when the startups were getting bought out, I decided that I would work in a community to help build those startups to grow. And I worked at Ontario Genomics for 17, 18 years. And then I sort of wanted to do different things. And right now I'm doing consulting, and I work for different companies, helping them with their business plans. And I tend to do a lot of art and creative stuff with people that I meet randomly. So thanks again for being here. That's a bit of my career. And I think I'm rocking a Movember mustache, but maybe not rocking as the word I'd use.
Thank you, Dennis. That's wonderful. Well, as our audience can tell, we have 2 exceptional individuals who have joined us here. I'm very pleased to be the host of the session. So I think we'll just get right into it. The first question that we have, and Tessa, maybe I'll ask you to jump in, is what do you find wonderful about being queer? What do you love about your identities?
So, I mean, my view on being queer has evolved over time. I think, to me, there are lots of elements to it. Certainly, it's about who you love and who you find attractive. And I mean, to be very candid, one of the things that made it very hard for me to embrace who I actually was that when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of lies that were told about transgender people by the cis community and by the people who are gatekeeping our identity. And one of them was, you can't be a real trans woman unless you're attracted to men. Because the only reason why anyone would want to become a woman is to be with a man, right? The profound heterosexual bias in culture. And I wasn't attracted to men. I never have been. So I felt very alienated from that. And that was one thing that made me think, well, I can't possibly be like that. But I always knew I was different in some way. And I think a lot of it had to do with identifying a lot with women and women's activities, and really also in particular, female friendships were always very appealing to me. I liked that deep emotional connection. I liked the vulnerability. I liked talking. I liked sharing my feelings. And as a guy in the 80s, there were words for guys who were sensitive and liked sharing their feelings, and they weren't particularly complimentary. And it wasn't just bad to be trans, it was bad to be gay. So, and people are surprised to hear that it was like that in Toronto in the 80s and 90s, but I'm here to tell you it absolutely was. So, you know, to me, queerness is about certainly who you love. But for me, I think I've embraced a much broader view of queerness over time. And, you know, I mean, maybe I'll give an example. So when I went to Pride for the first time in 2023, as an out queer person. And I remember walking down Church Street after the parade, and I just looked around and I said, like, there are so many different people here. There are people with different bodies, different sexual expressions, different gender expressions, different voices, different clothes, different everything. And I remember thinking, like, oh yeah, like when we're all together, we're actually a very big family. Like individually, we're kind of strange where we are individually, but collectively, we're part of a community. And to me, I mean, queerness really just means being different and being diverse. And to me, what I love about being queer is just that I'm very open to interacting with and hearing from people who are different. And I think that marginal voices and marginal experiences are actually really, really important. And so I think in some ways it's made me much more open-minded, a better listener, more tolerant of other people, more tolerant of different viewpoints. And I think queerness is really like you can really expand that. You know, people who are neurodivergent sometimes identify as neuroqueer, right? So like if you are, you know, if you're neurospicy, you can, that's a form of queerness too, right? So, and I find it's a really, like, to me, what it comes down to is like the emancipatory potential to just be who you really are and be yourself and show up. And when you bring every part of yourself to your work, to your relationships, you are a better friend, a better clinician, a better researcher, a better partner, and a better citizen. And so to me, that is really what queerness is about, is showing up authentically. And I truly wish that cis people have the same freedom that we do. I mean, it comes at a tremendous price. I won't get into how hard it is to come out as queer, but to me, it's been worth it. And I have absolutely no regrets about it whatsoever.
Thank you. That was such a insightful and comprehensive answer. Dennis, what would you like to add? What perspective do you have for that question?
Well, first of all, I love being queer, and I think this is similar to what Tessa says, because it's my authentic self, and the ability to be in touch with that, because you're a little bit different and you're not what societal norms are, although they do evolve. But I agree. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, I had no role models, so I just knew I was different. Now, also being raised by sort of in an Irish community of people, you know, the one thing is, you know, I developed a sense of humor, maybe as a deflection for that. So I bring humor to everything that I interact with and everything. And because I think that if we open with that openness, it sort of maybe brings some empathy to it. So I could deflect a lot of things with humor. So believe me, that's ingrained as part of being gay to me. It was really protection. And yeah, that has evolved. And I think we'll get to some of that later. But to me, the ability to be able to be comfortable with that, because you know, at 18 or 16, I wasn't comfortable with that, but knew I was different. But once I became sort of secure in that, and this was early because my creativity, and I really don't know if that's entwined with being gay, but yes, let's say it is, because I do think sort of, you know, not to stereotype people, but I felt creativity. I brought creativity. And I think that was another way maybe of deflecting some of this thing. So take the focus off me and focus on these things. And so, but it's always been that creativity. I try to take positive things out of negative things. And believe me, I'm a cis white male. So I do think I have privilege, which is very different for a lot of different people. And so I do acknowledge that. And I actually use that to help platform for other people. But just my inherent nature and being gay is just entwined in that. And you know, when I came out in the gay community, and I noticed this when I first moved to, when you move to different cities, like when I was in an academic tower, which I did, you're already meeting a diverse group of people because they're from, like, I tended to end up hanging out with more diverse people because I was raised without television. So to me, the people I could interact with were usually the people that had immigrated, like that were foreigners in different countries. And so my group was always diverse, and I always felt like I got the best stuff out of a diverse group of people, like the best out of me and fulfilling my potential. And so when I actually came to Toronto and I found that the gay community is very segregated, and there are images like in anything, and I never identified, like I hang out with a diverse group of people. There are different sizes, they're not all muscle people. So it was really interesting. It took me a while to develop that community, but the science community in academia tended to be a little bit more accepting of that. And so to me, it really helped me move along. So I love it. And I would never, I think that sometimes I was protective earlier in my career, but as I gained confidence in science, talent spoke for me. So I love it, and I love mentoring people about it.
I love that both of you, there's no holding you back, either of you. You're coming through the airwaves here with such strength in your own person, just really coming forward with that. And I really love that. I think that idea of authenticity is so important for everybody to embrace, and you've both spoken to it so clearly. I'm just wondering now, how does your identity then, what you've just described to us, and your identity as a queer person really sort of interface or become entwined with your identity as a scientist? Dennis, Dennis, do you want to jump on that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's so intertwined. The one thing I brought to, like, there's two ways you can think about this, is bringing science, being gay and bringing that to science, and then also as a scientist bringing that to gay communities. I think it's very intertwined for me. It's a huge part of my life, but I always felt in science community, we're always thinking of engagement. And as we see what happened in the US and fake information, to me it's always about bringing information about things to people in a sort of in the way I can do it, and I tend to do that in a creative way. So engaging people that are not engaged. So, in aspects of my science career, especially in the last career, I brought art into everything because I felt art is a therapeutic tool. My whole art collection was in our office. The CEOs that I worked for told me that it totally changed the way information moved in an office that was shaped like a T. So when you don't have dead walls. So to me, that's how I sort of helped that in the community. But I also started looking at the way when we were building projects, because that's what my role was, really building $10 million projects with multidisciplinary teams, was really sort of bringing that vision that when you are sort of a marginalized community, you can bring that sort of thing, because we are all in a bias. We all have a bias. You can't help that. You will look at an event, like, I don't know how witnesses in court do it, but you'll look at an event and your vision will be totally different than someone else, like the way you view that episode because of your bias. And so to me, having a diverse group, that's what I bring to the table. And so in that way, it was good. But when PrEP was coming to the market, telling the gay community about what that really meant, because a lot of people, especially when PrEP first came on the market, a lot of people thought it was a vaccine against, HIV. Well, no, it's a strain of, and sort of explaining to people that this is not like this will help, but this is not what it is, and sort of bringing that, and also using I used to get old light brights that I'd find at garage sales, because nothing in my loft, I rescue everything from the street and I turn it into something, and I would get old light brights and I would teach my friends through creative projects what science was, like karyotyping all your insights. So it was doing things in a creative way that made it easier for people to come into the world of science. And so that's sort of how I feel like it's just my identity. I love everything has a scientific perspective. I think everybody's born as a natural scientist and a creative person. And then aptitude is what weeds people out in the education system. And I try to go beyond that and bring people in.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Tessa, what do you think? Does being a scientist influence the way you show up in the queer community?
Yeah, in a number of ways. I mean, I guess, I don't specialize in gender diversity. It's not my field of interest. I'm primarily interested in care of older adults, and I'm very focused on very pragmatic clinical questions and on things that are relevant to the program that I run. But I do try to take a scientific and evidence-based lens to that. The way that it informs what I do, I think there are a few layers. I mean, first of all, one thing I try to do is really try to involve and make sure that the people that I invite to be part of my research as investigators, including like residents, medical students, I try really hard to make sure that people feel comfortable and people like that the group is really diverse. And I think it's actually kind of funny because we had a group photo for our program, and um, there was one cis male in the entire group, and it was like 20 people. So I mean, that wasn't deliberate, but I mean, I don't think you will see that too often with highly profiled clinical research programs in anywhere in the world, to be perfectly honest. So I try to be really deliberate about giving people opportunities, and I mean, to be honest, it's not hard to do because there are just so many talented people, and if you take their identity out of the equation, you know, I feel like I have the best of both worlds. I have a really diverse set of perspectives and the most talented team I could possibly hope for. I do try to bring considerations to what I do that I think are different. So, for example, when we look at older adults, their lived environment's really important. So, like, are they coming from a nursing home? Do they live alone? Are they coming from a retirement home? What are their social resources? And I find often in the discourse around older adults, we have this vision of like this kindly old couple living in the house that they own, and they have a doting daughter who comes and looks after them. And, you know, lots of people don't have family. Lots of people don't own their homes. Lots of older adults experience homelessness. Lots of older adults have very complicated relationships with their families. Like, if you think about it, like, if you have a difficult family dynamic and you're estranged from your children, it's not like you turn 65 and you become a nuclear family again, right? Like that life continues. Like, you're a whole person, right? People have substance use issues, people are racialized, people don't speak English as a first language, people have physical disabilities. And I try really, really hard to make sure that my work reflects that diversity, because I'm mindful of the bias we can have towards like our own experiences, and it's just like, if you are going to get to the truth of a question, you have to really make sure you're reflecting reality. And I'm pretty militant about like wanting to get to the truth. I think that's probably like what makes me a scientist in ways. I think the truth matters. I think reality is important. The other thing too for me is I really value being in a position of leadership as a transgender person, and I think visibility is really important. I mean, I to my knowledge, I think I'm one of the only openly trans people involved in a senior leadership role in clinical medicine, or in most roles in Canada, and that's not a brag. It's just literally true. So, so I think, and then I think to, you know, if you see it, people may feel motivated to believe they can do it. And I've had a number of residents say, you know, one of the reasons why I felt I wanted to do emergency medicine is I'm transgender, and I saw you succeeding and thriving, and I was like, oh, I can do this too. And I try to be that person. And also, like, I have a lot of residents who experience different types of discrimination and sort of like unsafe situations, and they feel they can confide in me, right? Because they know that I've been through this before, which, believe me, I have. And they know that I can relate. And I think also too, to be perfectly honest, like, I always tell people, they're like, oh, you seem really confident. I'm like, I mean, I'm a visibly queer, trans, middle-aged woman with a public role who works in emergency departments overnight. There's really not much that scares me. And so I try to like reflect that courage to people, and you know, I don't know, manifest some kind of bravery or openness. So I realize that's kind of a sprawling answer, but that's how it informs my work as a scientist.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's again, I mean, it leads us to our next question, because of your honesty, because of sort of the passion that you have for finding the truth, and that drive to create you know, the spaces that allow the truth to emerge. I'm wondering about, how do you navigate disclosing your queer identity, particularly in science spaces? And has that changed over time? Maybe, Tess, you could just sort of continue a little more on your thinking there.
So, I mean, I made a decision early on that I was just going to be out and be myself, and transition socially and really not hide it. So, you know, to me, passing is something I kind of do for, I don't know, to make life easier, but passing has never been the goal for me. I'm very proud to be trans. I'm very proud to be known as trans. Like, it I think it's beautiful. I love it. It's not something I'm ashamed of. I don't know why I would live my life in a way that reflects shame. Admittedly, I'm really privileged to live in a place where I'm not in physical danger all the time because I'm visibly trans, right? Like I mean, I've had all kinds of awful experiences, but I've never felt like physically unsafe in that way. So I'm really fortunate. Um, so I mean, I just lean into it, honestly. But I have to say though, one thing I'm very mindful of is that, I transitioned after I was established as a physician and a researcher and a leader, right? Like I came to my role with like 40 plus years of cis het white male privilege in my backpack, right? And I don't know that I would have gotten to where I am today had I not had those privileges, right? Like I think that's just a fact. So I try to be very mindful of that. And I think in some ways, like I have an obligation to acknowledge that and acknowledge the marker of difference and not erase that journey, because I think it is really relevant to my experience. And I try, I mean, to me also too, like it is scary to be out and visible. It can be really, really frightening. And I remember actually early in my transition, there was a gala to celebrate the endowment of my program, right? It was a huge deal. It was a black tie event. And I had never been to a social event of any kind as a trans person. And I said, I don't think I'm going to go. I just don't think I can do this. It's just too difficult. And I wrote to one of my trans friends and she's like, of course you're going to go. You're going to go. Like, of course you're going to go. I'm like, oh, I am? She's like, yeah, you're going to go. I'm like, okay. So I went. And I remember I rented a hotel room nearby and I spent 3 hours getting my outfit and my makeup ready to go. And I went to Starbucks to get a coffee on my way. And the barista was like, hello, sir, what would you like? And I'm like, ah. And at that moment, I'm like, you know what? I kind of want to turn around and just go back. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go. And I remember going to the event and my hands are shaking. I'm so scared. I feel so vulnerable, so visible. And one of my friends actually met me there. And she's like, oh, I knew this would be hard for you, so I bought you a bracelet to wear. It's like, oh my gosh. So now I'm crying and I'm visibly trans and I'm at this, it's like, it was a lot. But I remember after that moment, I'm like, I did that. Like, what am I scared of now, honestly? Like what could be more frightening than that? And so I think that early on, I realized you can be visible, you can be embarrassed, you can be scared, and you will survive. And the freedom and courage that comes from that is absolutely incredible. So yeah, I don't know. I love being trans. I love being queer. It's awesome. It's great. I like being a beautiful trans woman. I don't have no desire to hide that whatsoever. Life is good. Life is good.
Yeah, I love how you're just standing in it all, and your perspective and the stories you're sharing, I think, are so meaningful and helpful, to many people who are, thinking about how they show up in different spaces. It's not always easy, but courage and finding your courage is such an important attribute to have. Dennis, what are your thoughts? How do you navigate disclosing your queer identity?
Well, for me, it was always just obvious. I mean, I don't think I'm the most macho, maybe toxic gay demographic, whatever. Anyways, I look at it. It was a very different world in 1978 in a rural community. I mean, I think that I was different. What's interesting to me is people always say I'm an out of the box thinker, and what frustrates me about that comment is I think in my own box. You think in your box. You may think I'm an out of the box thinker, but it's just because it's different than yours. And so that's why I always promote that I'm just a different voice and maybe a more diverse voice that comes in. So if that's part of queerness, then I'm that. But when I was in 78, 80s, I'm not sure that I was disclosing that. I mean, I was probably having behavior, and I think people assume, but it was a different world. But as I sort of developed my career in science, and I really do owe this to science, is that as I got more comfortable and knew where I stood and got more experience in science, then my voice mattered. And people may not have looked at maybe sort of the other attributes, but later, it just is part of my nature, and it's the way I live. And so to me, I remember being, and this is to sort of Tessa's point in a way, is I was senior leadership, and they were counting the diversity people they had in their senior leadership, and they didn't even count me. Now, I don't know if that was a compliment or not, because everybody in the office knew that I was gay, but they didn't count me. So what does that mean? Is it because I'm a cis white male and you just sort of don't get counted or whatever? So it's been interesting, but now I'm not sure I ever disclose it. It just comes up because I want it to be natural. I don't want it to be the thing that I'm only identifying as a gay person. It's one aspect of my identity. I'm not throwing things in your face that don't come with a reason for that. Like, it's not frivolous in any way. And I give that platform to people that work with me. So when people work with me, they know I'm gay. They get invited. Most people that I work as a team, because I have to figure out, I know how I work. I don't know how other people work. So I create environments and drag people to my loft, which is a creative space, and they come and do art projects with me. And immediately, for sculpting or for painting, I know exactly how to interact with the person. I know the people that have more fears than others. And so it's looking at different ways to sort of figure out how I can bring that out. But it was always, I would say, once I had a PhD, or maybe in my PhD, I became very more vocal about it, probably because I had a partner at the time. But to me, the one thing, I never felt bad about being gay, because I know the world's changing. But since I didn't have role models, the one thing I was able to do was create whatever my own model for whatever my life. I would have liked to have had support, but I just created the way my family brought me up, is to treat everybody like I want to be treated. And that has really come back to do it. So I disclose, if somebody, like, what I feel and what I've had happen in meetings is when I open my mouth, because I always, when I'm in a meeting, especially if I'm coordinating it, as we're waiting for people to join, I always have jokes, or not jokes, they're not for, like, just something. Like, I remember, because we know how sharing data is a big issue now, especially medical data. And I really am a proponent for sharing because I've had my genome sequenced. What I used to do is start jokes going, oh, well, my drag name is Sharon Data. So and like, that's what I would use. And it's to create, and so people don't view me as a threat. And it's really worked in my benefit, especially cis white males that are straight, because they just look at me and they go, well, that's nothing. And then I can, because it's talent at the underlying, if you have a career in science and you're successful in a career in science, then talent comes, because when you're working for small startups, they need it to work. They usually don't care about an identity, but I also think it's also ivory tower thinkers. So to me, I disclose, and I have no problem. If it's like where I work, people will know me. So I drag them to drag shows, like when Dairy Queen used to happen here, Diva Las Vegas, and they love being a part of it, because you're sharing your authentic self as opposed to being guarded. And really, so to me, it was always about, and if you ask anybody, and this is why Zoya probably brought me up here, is I always created a space that was safe, and I would protect people, and people, not protect people because I think people can do that, but it was just always about being your authentic self, so that people know where they can go if they didn't have a support group.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. And you're kind of leading naturally into the last question that we have here, which is around, the official Pride in STEM Day is really about queering up science spaces and sciencing up the queer spaces. So really this sort of integration of all the authentic identities that we have, and creating the spaces that are safe and welcoming and open and creative and data driven, and all of the all of the good things that we want to see happen. What else do you think we need to do? You've both described some evolution. You've both described comfort and confidence in being yourself. What else do you see in the spaces that you're in that we could be doing to support others to have the same degree of comfort, confidence, engagement with their whole personality? Tessa, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say Sharon Data is such a slay. I can't even get over that. That's wild. I love that. Yeah, so I mean, I think I'll start with how to queer spaces. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think there's sort of high level stuff and there's kind of lower level stuff. I mean, absolutely ensuring a diverse representation of people in planning events is really important. I think inclusion and visibility are really important as well. I will say a couple of specific things that I think are probably a little bit controversial, but I feel like I have to say them. One of them that I find really challenging is that whenever it's like we're having a queer event, it's like we gotta have a drag queen, right? We have to have a drag queen. And I think as a trans woman, my relationship with mainstream drag is very, very complicated. My view of drag is that it is a beautiful form of cultural expression, but it is very much centered in gay male culture. And it is a focal point for gay culture, which is beautiful. I love that about it. But as a trans woman, drag queens have nothing to do with me whatsoever. They are not transgender. They don't purport to be transgender. They don't teach me anything about being female. They are a form of performance art centered in a particular cultural milieu. So having drag bingo and being like, well, that's trans inclusive, I'm like, it's really not. It's really actually not. I don't mean that it feels bad. It's just like, that's not really what. And what I would point out is that there actually are a huge number of trans masculine performers, drag kings, drag performers who are assigned female at birth, meaning cis women who perform drag, like Chapel Rowan to me is like the quintessence of that. She's essentially a drag queen who's a woman, and lots of other minority outsider drag performances. So consider platforming some of those people because they are trying to build a career and they have a lot to say. And in some ways, when you think about what is transgressive about drag, to me, they're the ones doing the truly transgressive work. They're the ones challenging concepts of gender, and they're the ones really performing queerness in a really profound way. So it's no slam on drag queens, like I'm all for it, but just don't think I have a drag queen, therefore I've included trans people. It's not the same thing. I think also, yeah, I mean, I think really just, I think it's sort of a paradox because you want to center queerness. And if you're going to do that, that's great, but then don't kind of elide it by only including certain parts or representatives of it, right? Like make sure that you have people from the different parts of the spectrum. And if you can't do that, that's fine, but just have some humility about what you're actually representing. In terms of science in queer spaces, I mean, a lot of the struggles right now for queer and trans rights are centered in ownership of facts and science. And I think in particular, and I'm very hesitant to say this on a public platform because it is a scary thing to say, but I think a lot of the science about things like rapid onset gender dysphoria and transgender youth is not centered in evidence or fact. A lot of the backlash is not evidence and science based. And I think as scientists, we kind of have an obligation to challenge that and bring truth to that. And so I think our research can support that. And I think thinking about how we can use our skills and our work to support queer and gender diverse causes is really, really important. That doesn't mean that you can only do research related to it, but I mean, consider contributing to a position paper, consider being part of an article, consider writing something for a scientific journal, right? Like use the power and the credibility you have to do some work. That to me is how you can queer scientific spaces. And I mean, but you know, I certainly, Dennis, what you said about not wanting it to be your whole thing, like that's important too. Like you don't, I had a professor and he was a gay man and he said, you have to be a homosexual professional, not a professional homosexual. Like it doesn't have to be your whole thing. It doesn't have to be your whole career, but also like consider how your career can influence how you advocate for your community. So those are my thoughts on the two sides to that.
Yeah, thank you. That's really, really helpful. Dennis, we've got about a minute or two before we go to questions. Would you like to add anything?
Well, querying up my science base, I use it. It's my very nature. So I can't, like, I remember I was teaching a bunch of youth at U of T in this youth summer program. And again, not to harp on drag queens, but to me, one of the examples I was getting, because we're dealing with obesity in our communities and in the world as a health concern. And so I would always do these, because gut microbiome is such a huge part of where I play in my spare time too. Well, not play, but actually work and do creative stuff. And so one of the things I did is always my examples or be bringing that, and not to make fun of it, was never make fun of, like, one of my mice, which was an obese mouse, was called Shalita Buffet. And again, just doing things that make it sort of, and Lena Cuisine was my thin one, and switching gut microbiome. And it was just, it's about making speech that's not like I don't really have a filter, which to me should create the safe space and doing that. So to me, bringing art and doing things about the way I view my own life through the way we do clinical trials, and maybe pass it to one of your points, seniors are never in a clinical trial. It's like young people, and it's sort of having that awareness that what you bring. And so to me, that's the way I just live on my life. But to queer up, science up queer spaces, to me, I try to do projects that show diversity in the way I do my genome sequence. And we don't reach out. Like, it's great that we have support groups now, like, or these agencies in big organizations like UHN, where you have this STEM community, or STEM and Pride, whereas we don't in smaller organizations. So to me, it's showing that we do exist in science, but maybe helping some of the smaller places that probably don't have the same thing, but also going into the queer spaces and presenting science where it matters to those, or in a way, like, engage to the unengaged, like, with this information, and do it in a fun, interactive way. That's what I do.
Thank you. Well, both of you have added so much perspective, such a rich conversation. I so appreciate both of you showing up here authentically and with so much passion and knowledge and insight and some really great ideas for all of us to think about how we support each other and how we continue to move forward in an inclusive and supportive way, particularly in a large academic health sciences center like UHN. But I also like what you said there, Dennis. Like, we also have a responsibility. We're Canada's #1 hospital. We are leaders. We want to be shaping the broader system and systems, locally, nationally, and globally. So I really appreciate everything you've both said. I wonder now if there's any questions that have come in through our Slido. Okay. All right. You've got one shout out there for your Sharon Data name. Let's see. Here's another one here. Do you remember a time where your LGBTQ+ identity helped you understand something in science or medicine better because of that identity and perspective? Tessa, do you have, or sorry, Dennis, were you going to jump in there?
Yeah, I have a quick example that was really interesting to me because it sort of plays in this eugenics space. So you remember when, I forget, his name was Dean somebody in San Francisco, and he was looking for a gay gene. Okay, and what's interesting to me is, I study or look at complex disease, which is multi-things. There's probably a 30% chance. There's 30% that's genetics or genomics, and then there's environmental issues. And, when we start looking for genes that I don't think cause a serious disease, I find it difficult when people go for that, because if people were if they found a gay gene, and I would think that gay behavior or queer behavior is more complex than that, than one gene. But if we did find that, we would just set up a tool to start screening for it. Now, is that a good, bad thing? To me, it's a bad thing, because I do think diverse things are great. So to me, looking at my identity, I didn't even know if I wanted that kind of research. And I was vocal to start conversations about, what does finding a gay gene do really to the world? Does it make people more comfortable? No, because then I think they get screwed. So to me, it helps me So I guess that's something, is that my identity was saying, why would we do this type of research? And really, what are you trying to get out of here? Is to make it more acceptable? Because I mean, anybody that looks at evolution would know that being gay has been selected for through the years. So anyway, I don't know if that really answers the question, but it's something that I always think about.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a helpful perspective. Tessa, did you have anything you wanted to share on that question? Something you think you do better in science or medicine because of the identity and perspective you have?
I mean, I think I addressed some of it around mentorship and those aspects of it. I don't have the tenure in science that Dennis has, and I don't have the clinical research, like bench research background that a lot of people in this audience may have. Can I answer the second question? Would that be okay?
Sure, let's jump into that one.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how to make our workspaces feel queer friendly. I mean, I guess what I would, sorry?
Nope, go for it.
Oh, okay. So I was going to say, so how do you work to make people feel comfortable to be themselves? I think stories are really powerful, right? Stories are super, super, super powerful. So I think certainly, yes, you should watch the modules on using people's pronouns. And you should absolutely read the policies on non-discrimination and abide by them. But the fact of the matter is that I'm often the first trans person people have met in a leadership role or in a medical role. Like, it's not unusual for me to see a patient who's like, oh, I didn't know there were trans doctors. I'm like, well, yeah, there's trans everything. But I think, because of that, I think the trans experience may not be familiar to people, and people may make a lot of assumptions. And I think stories are the way to explain it. Everything is better explained through narrative. And sort of condensing someone's experience into a series of bullet points that apply to all transgender people or all queer people, to me is it's in some ways it kind of defeats the purpose, because like I said, queerness is about diversity, right? It's about a huge breadth and spectrum. And so I think instead of just having a review of pronouns and giving everyone pronoun pins, which I think should be normalized, like have a speaker series, have people with different queer experiences speak. And it's actually interesting. There's a program in the UK, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but it is literally just queer people who volunteer to speak at different organizations throughout the UK, because the evidence shows that the biggest determinant of acceptance of any group is knowing someone from that group. It humanizes us. It tends to very quickly disabuse people of assumptions, and it's much harder to hate people when you know who we actually are, and you know that so many parts of our lives are so similar to parts of their lives. So I think stories, narratives, visibility, getting people to know one another, and then certainly, like, I'm always happy to speak to groups within UHN myself. That would be my suggestion on how to do that effectively.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I hope that we all continue to affirm our commitment to a healthy, workplace that really is about, really the human experience for the patients we serve and for the people that we work with. And, as a nurse, I just think about the most important thing to me is actually getting to know people and getting to understand who they are, and then how I can work with them to bring out the best in them, and hopefully vice versa. So you've both spoke to that a little bit through several of your comments. I think we have time maybe for one more question. So we have a question here from Alex. For younger scientists, do you have recommendations on how to motivate yourself to stay in science within toxic work environments? It's a pretty loaded question, but a couple of thoughts from each of you would be helpful here.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. So, it's really a toxic work environment, and I have worked in a toxic work environment, and I laughed. But to me, when you don't have that, it never made me get away from science. Okay, toxic work environments are by everybody, in my experience. People always say a cultural environment in your workspace is important, and they do surveys, but they're performative so that they can go to a board. And I just don't like performative. Like, to me, say what you're doing. And so a toxic work environment, I was never in a toxic work environment because of a gay thing. I was in toxic work environment because of the toxic work environment. What motivated me to stay in science was I love science. And two things. I wanted to live all over the world. And how's the easiest way to do that is being a scientist, because once you have a PhD in science, you tend to be more in demand. Now, I was in AI and genomics, which tends to be a really thing. Software engineering would be another one. But to me, I was always in it because I felt like if I didn't have science, like, again, it was intertwined, I didn't have a life. And so what I did is I tried to make sure that those were short-lived. I felt like I was, so anyways, I think that a toxic work environment is something you can't change. Bring it to a manager or find a manager. And this is why I think that we need, like, when you're in a smaller office or whatever, it's a different thing. But to me, it's stay there because it gets better. And I know you've heard that because you're a gay person from TAN, but to me, what it did is my experience got better. They were there for my talent. In toxic work environments, make sure you suggest in the work organization or in the work organizations that you work in, that there's some place that you can put in stuff like those little sort of, things that we can do better. And I would hope that people are more enlightened nowadays. That's all I can say. It's a toxic work environments are hard to change but it shouldn't change the way you feel about science.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. Tessa, last word to you. Do you have anything to add to that one?
I mean, maybe I can just circle back to something I said earlier, which is, it really is about seeing people as individuals and treating people as individuals. And my experience is that it is rare for an environment to be accepting and functional and then just only be bad to queer people. Like, that to me is that's very unusual. It's usually places that are really bad for queer people are often really bad for women. They're often really bad for BIPOC people. They're often really bad for people experiencing disabilities. So to me, the mandate to address toxicity, it's sort of a kind of like a high tide floats all boats. Like, the things you do to make queer people feel more accepted will actually help address toxicity for everyone else. I truly believe that, because it's really just about accepting difference. As to what can motivate you to stay in science, I mean, at the end of the day, like, there's just no substitute for a mentor. There just is nothing more important than mentorship. When I think about the course my career has taken, at every inflection point, there's been a person who's made a difference and made me think differently about what I was doing. And I think find your person, find your mentor of any kind, and that will sustain you, because you are not the first person to be in a toxic work environment. Doesn't mean you should have to put up with it, but you are just not the first person to navigate it. And I think the good people among us, we don't want to pull the ladder up behind us. We want to help other people succeed, and we want to help other people thrive. And I think if there's one thing that queer people appreciate, I think it's the importance of community. Like, I really, really think that is a defining trait of being queer, is like having your people, having your family of choice. And I think we want other people to have that experience too. And I think that's something that we would want to extend to everybody, not just queer people, not just trans people.
Thank you. I think that's the perfect note to end on. So I'd like to invite everyone to give a round of applause wherever you are to Dr. Ringer and Dr. McCormick for joining me in this very important conversation. And we've also put up on the screen here a QR code, so you can provide some feedback to today's session. I think it's really important. We are a learning organization. We always want to hear from you, have your opinions. So please reach out, give us feedback through the survey. And then also there's an email there. You can also reach out to if you have any other ideas you want to share with the group that's organized this session for today. So thank you all very much for joining us. And thank you to our esteemed panelists who were just so brilliant. Thank you very, very much.